Basically, both words have been used to refer to diverse and often mutually exclusive movements. There's nothing inherently libertarian about the concept of the right wing, and nothing inherently anti-libertarian about the concept of the left wing. In demonstrating this, a recent article in The Atlantic you may have read noted that some of the most historically salient right-wing movements are monarchism, fascism, fundamentalism, and libertarianism. Obviously, these movements have very little in common. So, in identifying myself as a left libertarian, I am no more declaring myself a communist than right-wing libertarians are aligning themselves with fascism or fundamentalism. So, the meanings of these terms aren't inherent, so we have to conclude that they are contextual, which means that their meaning is constantly changing according to the dominant tendencies among self-identified leftists and radicals. This is why Murray Rothbard aligned himself with the left in the mid-60s and right in the later years of his life. He did so according to the extent to which these movements at any given moment were libertarian. Thus, he writes in what may be the definitive statement on the terms left and right, quote, 20 years ago I was an extreme right-wing Republican who believed, as one friend pungently put it, that Senator Taft had sold out to the socialists. Today I am most likely to be called an extreme leftist, since I favor immediate withdrawal from Vietnam, denounce U.S. imperialism, advocate black power, and have just joined the New Peace and Freedom Party. This is the important part. And yet my basic political views have not changed a single iota in these 2 decades. It is obvious that something is very wrong with the old labels, with the categories of left and right, and with the ways in which we customarily apply these labels to American political life. My personal odyssey is unimportant. The important point is that if I can move from extreme right to extreme left merely by standing in one place, drastic though unrecognized changes must have taken place through the political spectrum over the last generation. End quote. So having established what the left and left libertarianism doesn't refer to, I should probably explain what it does refer to. In the context of 2014 and widespread self-identification as leftists by people who are most emphatically not communists, and some who are, I find it most helpful to consider the left a set of tendencies and inclinations, or ends, which can be achieved in numerous and often contradictory ways, or means. These inclinations are concerned with subordination, exclusion, deprivation, and war. In this view, the left is not necessarily defined by any particular policy prescriptions. It is at best a vague allusion to a certain sensibility. For example, Roderick T. Long identified how the left to, I quote, in some ways a very libertarian impulse, to protect people they see as being pushed around. When these left-wingers look at contemporary society, they see an economy dominated by mammoth and personal corporations with enormous and seemingly unaccountable power. They see lower and middle income people disempowered in the workplace, struggling to make ends meet. And they see social practices rigged against blacks, women, gays, immigrants, and other oppressed groups. And they turn to government to address these problems. We could probably elaborate at great length on this theme, but hopefully you get the idea. In my opinion, through a series of the most inventive self-deception, libertarians have often avoided engaging seriously with this point of view. We talk so much among ourselves about the extent to which the issues the left cares about are caused by the schemes of the Leviathan state. And while it sometimes isn't uttered, this means they're valid. Why do we ever seem to lead with this in the endless Facebook debates? Why do we mock them? By the simple merit of being pissed off at leaders fundamentally onto something. And with the right message, we can help them sharpen that instinct into a base of knowledge and the skill set to smash the injustice they see in society. By way of finding that message, let's now define left libertarianism. Left libertarianism can be broadly defined as the belief that the concerns outlined above are wholly valid and can be addressed by means which are consistent with libertarian ideologies, given a robust understanding of both free markets and non-commercial relations and institutions. You might even say it is the application of libertarian principles to these concerns. determining of left libertarianism is that it doesn't differ in the essential aspect, which is the principles of political organization, namely free markets, property rights, and voluntary association. Therefore, it is argued it is simply libertarianism. This is a semantic argument I won't get into here, but it's worth pointing out that with all that libertarianism entails, in the corpus of libertarian thought would be about a paragraph long. On the contrary, libertarians, left or right, always try to expand on this by exploring the implications of these principles of political organization. They have tried to explain how abandonment of these principles has led to strife, and how societies which have embraced them have experienced peace and prosperity as a result. It is an attempt to demonstrate the relevance of this core of libertarianism to basically valid non-libertarian concerns. It is an attempt to speak to the sensibility we identified by offering an in-depth exploration of these concepts. The best of Murray Rothbard's writing in the second half of the 60s and in the early 70s was concerned with promoting liberty to the left, and in doing so refining both leftist and libertarian thought. It's partly from the journals he published during this time, first Left and Right and then the Libertarian Forum, that the perspective we're talking about today began to emerge and clarify. But never mind Murray's disillusionment. The value of left libertarianism today lies in precisely that pursuit of his, in broadening the base of libertarianism by engaging empathetically and critically, rather than competitively with the left. There is an obvious reason for this. Most people, and particularly self-identified leftists, already have value systems. As I suggested, these value systems largely do not pertain to the principles of political or economic organization, but to ends they value independent of means. Such people are unlikely to adopt libertarianism if they don't understand how or why to apply it to their existing value system. So left libertarianism speaks to these people in the following ways. Firstly, and probably most importantly, it affirms their suspicion about current economic systems, and it clarifies it by exposing the role of the state in creating and sustaining the conditions of which they despair. In its fierce opposition to the present order, it often contradicts both leftists and libertarians. As the latter sometimes adopt an attitude Kevin Carson's term vulgar libertarianism. Vulgar libertarianism essentially consists of that same fallacy which so often characterizes the pro-state left. I'll call it a capitalist fallacy, if you might call it anything. For the leftists, this fallacy involves taking our current political economy as an approximation of a free market and attributing its abuses to the free market on this basis. For the right, it involves taking our current political economy as an approximation of a free market and defending its abuses on this basis. And probably a lot of you are thinking that, of course, you don't think this is a free market. And obviously, no libertarian consciously and consistently believes it is. But cognitive dissonance is the thing. The fallacy is obviously committed selectively. I hate to always be bringing up Rothbard, but here's what he had to say about the vulgar libertarians discussed about in 1966. Quote, for some time, I've come to the conclusion that the great deficiency in the current outlook of thinking about libertarians and classical liberals is due to an enormous blind spot when it comes to big business. There is a tendency to worship big business per se, and a corollary tendency to fail to realize that while big business would indeed merit praise if they won that business on the purely free market, in the contemporary world of total mercantilism, and what is an essentially neo-fascist corporate state, business is a priori highly suspect. Big business most likely got that way through an intricate and decisive network of subsidies, privileges, direct and indirect grants, of monopoly protection. So it throws out the valorization of big business and occasionally the corollary contempt for law. It also throws out the scarecrows with which vulgar libertarians adorn their ideology, like Thatcher, Reagan, and the Liberal Party. It affirms their concern with the structural poverty and massive inequality and expands on it in several ways. For one example, it posits that the economic centralization engendered by the state has resulted in larger, more hierarchical, and more authoritarian firms that would have arose in the field of free market. In this and other ways, it is concerned with the welfare of the worker and seeks the humanization of work life. It applies the criticisms which mainstream libertarians often level at centrally planned economies to this arguably anomalous private analog, centrally planned firm. It questions the origin of widespread absentee ownership of property, the attending payment of rent, and as a direct consequence of these two facts, a larger amount of wage labor required of the worker to stay afloat. This may be controversial, but in all of this, fundamentally, it questions the often axiomatic notion that the worker finds himself in a purely voluntary and mutually beneficial transaction. As Rothbard says, this would be true in a purely free market, as duties today. One implication of this analysis of structural poverty is that the worker has far less bargaining power than he would have in a purely free market, and is therefore less able to secure a decent standard of living. Whereas a genuinely free market would result in far greater equality of wealth and power, more bargaining power for the worker, and thus better conditions. To be fair, vulgar libertarians realize this too in their better moments. The mystery is why then they choose to align themselves with business rather than the work or society. It offers a creative vision for the liberation of the worker, who, as Alexander Cancross put it, quote, has at his disposal a larger stock of capital at home than in the factory where it's employed, end quote, which by a series of devices government forcefully prevents him from utilizing. Obviously, if he could fairly use the capital he has in his home, he would not be willing to subject himself to total economic subordination to a boss. Uber is a good example of that. It embraces non-violent redistribution of wealth, meaning that people who have more want to give to those who have less, only they shouldn't be forced to do so. And meaning as well that the inherently equalizing powers of the free market by a radically different distribution of wealth. It wonders aloud why mainstream libertarians object so forcefully and constantly to the expropriation of wealth from the upper class, and have so little to say about the far greater expropriation from the poor, which has been happening for centuries and is still happening today. It wonders aloud why libertarians are so loudly condemn the use of violence by union workers against businesses, as to take this as a degradation of the unions per se, but don't allow the opposite tendency for businesses to use violence against union workers to alter their estimation of business per se. It also rejects the conception of privatization, which consists in selling government property for private businesses on terms which are highly advantageous to the business. Instead, it views government property as essentially unowned to be homesteaded by the people who actually occupy it, collectively, the schools for the faculty, the hospitals for the staff, and so on. Essentially, it entails a shifting of perspective, which again is embodied by Rothbard's experiences. His mentor, Mises, saw economic interventionism as driven primarily by anti-capitalist sentiment, whereas Rothbard came to see economic intervention as being motivated largely by the capitalists themselves, in ceaseless attempts to insulate themselves from market competition. Besides Oppenheimer's concept of two ways to acquire wealth, the first, through voluntary trade, is the economic means, and the second, through force, is the political means. The state, then, is the organization of political means. It provides for a legal, orderly, systematic channel for the creation of private property. In short, and Gary Chartier's perspective, so I see no reason to reinvent the wheel, it endorses leftist and libertarian concerns and challenges assumptions that make it difficult for leftists to embrace libertarians and for libertarians to become leftists. And it offers a provocative vision of an appealing politics in a world marked by greater freedom and fairness. criticizing the orthodoxy of libertarianism, and in adopting a language and focus which sometimes clashes with the sensibilities of the average libertarian. It will undoubtedly ruffle a few feathers. You don't have to think too hard to understand why his members of the left hear these well-grounded criticisms from persistent advocates of free markets. Nor is it hard to understand the danger of the left hearing these criticisms from other leftists who buy into the conflationism of local libertarians and therefore associate their various programs and tendencies with the free market. Again, it takes aim at those things which make it hard for leftists to embrace libertarianism. What can be of more value to the modern libertarian movement than identifying valid concerns of the left, empathizing with them, and offering viable and intelligently argued solutions to them? Conversely, what could hold less value to the libertarian movement than mocking, deriding, or ignoring the valid concerns of the people we ultimately need to know? In short, no, I am not now, nor have I ever been a member of the Communist Party. Thanks.
We have a few questions now. You can pick up. I'm going to do this. Limit it. Yeah, there you go. Okay, fine. So, any questions?
Yeah. I know you're starting, well, you're heading up to the an anarchist party. I'm just wondering how you're planning on getting any, how you're planning on getting invited to any sort of debate or getting any sort of word out from that, because it seems the first sort of thing you mentioned, anarchist people just turn off.
Well, that hopefully gives you the starting point. I think largely what we're drawing into the debate is the controversy factor. People are curious because it's an anarchist party. It defies what they expect from the political system, and therefore they want to provide it on their shows or whatever. Take it apart, but hopefully that gives us a platform to actually speak about it and tell it. Yeah.
I guess the term libertarian is a little bit sort of controversial and maybe misunderstood. Do you think that might just be maybe the name of it or a semantics thing? Is there any sort of rebranding or different way to sort of sell it so that it's less misunderstood and
to be honest, I personally think it's probably a better term for it. I choose to use left libertarianism because that's the label that almost scholars use. But I think largely why people have a reactionary hatred of it is because we've grown up in the modern world where the left is characterized by certain things, but that wasn't always the case. For example, a lot of classical liberals and market advocates did consider themselves part of the left in the 19th century. So I think it's just the modern context and what the left is seen as today. Yeah?
It seems to me, in my experience, that it's a waste of time trying to convince the left that libertarianism is the answer, because the modern left are all about control and they're all about violence. I'm sure everyone here's experienced it. If you try to convince them of one aspect of libertarianism, they'll find another aspect which they hate. And so, oh, but I still hate you because of that. So, how do you overcome that?
Yeah, that's certainly a problem. I think the main point of what I was saying is that their concerns have largely to do with things. They don't disagree with libertarianism necessarily because of its principles, but because they don't believe those principles lead to the results that they want. So the only way to really convince them is to demonstrate that free markets and property rights lead to equality, greater social freedom, and so forth. But that's still extremely difficult, and I'm not sure quite how to do it. But the work of people like Kevin Carlson in the Center for a Stateless Society goes a long way. Yeah.
How would you characterize left libertarian as fitting into libertarianism when libertarianism is often described as being either left or right, but rather centrist?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point. The chart Jason posited on is a good example of that. I think both left and right have authoritarian and libertarian tendencies. So it's kind of an attempt to identify the dominant libertarian tendencies in the left and emphasize them. Yeah.
So how are you going to market this move?
I have no idea, sorry.
It's all on you, Lee.
Yeah.
Actually, look on YouTube. Nipses.
Nipses, sir?
Yeah, as in neo-Nazi, but hipsters.
I'll look into that.
So do you then have hope that the idea of left libertarianism will encourage people from the left to sign up and become part of the libertarian debate?
Sorry, what do you mean? Can you repeat that first one?
Did you see left libertarianism therefore as a campaign opportunity for the left?
Yeah, essentially.
Having had much success dealing with Marxists and finding especially honest, everyone, in Australia.
Sadly, no, I've not had much success financing them. I know I haven't found either of them yet, but I have found that I've got a better reaction from leftists than some other libertarians. People, particularly who take a right-wing, pro-business perspective, tend to get, they run into a brick wall, whereas I don't find it run into that, although I don't quite succeed in convincing people to become libertarians. Yes.
Do you find that some people of the left, it's like they're very anti-war, but they're very into using police force to push their point of view, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I do. I think maybe that's just intellectual laziness. They can't conceive of a better way to achieve their ends than through force.
Do you think that maybe that could be a good entry point for them, for the left, like the leftist, like the militant left, who are kind of anti-war but militant? It makes sense to me, but like I see that could be like one way to try and start to massage them into more a libertarian framework.
Yes, so they can demonstrate that our means are consistent with their ends, but I don't think there's a great deal of hope for the more militant left, like socialist alternative. It might be better to just ignore it.
One more question. How do you feel like the right libertarians that bring up like Pinochet and Sir Joe and people like that up into the debate call them libertarians just because they had a couple of free market policies?
It bothers me very greatly. That's why I included the slur on Reagan and Thatcher. I think libertarians tend to worship a lot of terribly authoritarian people who happen to have a few good economic policies. Yeah.
I've got another one. It seems like a lot of people are asking about and perceiving the left as are, I suppose, your socialists and Marxists. You do have the sort of centre-left parties like the Labor Party, and they have had a lot of free market reforms in Australia, but at the same time they still do promote a huge amount of spending on social welfare.
Yeah.
Do you think that that may be a better target or a good target to kind of bring over, because there is a little bit of pragmatism amongst some of them?
Well, it certainly appeals to the more pragmatic types, and a lot of, some Labour policies are already well along the way to left libertarianism, I suppose, but not very many. I don't have anything else particularly insightful to say about that, sir.
So we get time for a couple more questions. Well, I've got one. If you could sum up the marketing pitch that you would give to a leftist in one sentence, right? You got your elevator pitch to a left person, agreeing with left libertarianism. How would that go?
I guess I would just summarize the basic fact that markets lead to greater equality of wealth and power, and it offers the freedom for people to live their lives as they choose. It's hard to get into a sentence.
I think I've got a better one. Let all your worries behind, step into the right side of freedom.
That's very good.
You have to like come up and ad mention do all these sort of slogans.
Sorry, it's kind of,
Yeah.
this is going to sound really pathetic, but do you honestly think that just saying to rabid lefties markets lead to equality is going to actually work?
I
They've
think-
been their entire time.
I think you actually have to voluminously demonstrate it for the economics and in-depth analysis, and they have to actually read it.
It's just that it's such a challenge because at every single point of the political science education that taught otherwise, it's like I break that. It's like
That's true, but you have the exact same problem with right libertarians who worship Sir Joe and Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. They're about as hard as them across the
I think that part of the thing he's trying to say is that using phrases like rabid lefties is counterproductive to what
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But they are.
All right, I think that's, do you have a good one?
Sort of. Do you think that, like, the rising tensions in Iran and the Middle East generally over the past couple of years has kind of provided an opportunity for anti-war lefties to kind of get on board with libertarianism? Do you think that the message of the left might actually go a little bit more towards what it was in, say, the 70s?
Yeah, I think being anti-war is a pretty significant common ground within the libertarians. It's fairly significant to build on.